Friends, I welcome you to my channel. Before listening to this story, I will ask you to like and subscribe. It is not difficult for you, but it is pleasant for me. And we're starting. I've never been a person who meets face to face. I solve all my problems with satisfaction, but never through confrontation. I'm happy, and it suits me. However, I have come to the conclusion that this is a concept that my wife cannot understand. I'm Ted Briscoe, and I've been married to Angela for 10 years. Angela is not a dazzling beauty with huge breasts and long blonde hair, just an ordinary housewife with brown hair and brown eyes. We have twin daughters who are still in elementary school. I work as an insurance agent. Nothing interesting or impressive, but I earn well, and the leftovers that accumulate will ensure my retirement. I assumed we got married because we loved each other, but now I'm not so sure. Angela seemed comfortable with the way things had been going for the first few years. I think it was a novelty to be married and have a family. We attended social events of the company and neighbors with children whenever we could. Lately, Angela seemed to be impressed by husbands who have important or dynamic jobs. It seemed that the job was not so much about money as about prestige. She wasn't like that when we got married, and now it seemed to have intensified. I got the feeling that she was less and less impressed by my status at work or as a husband. For her, my job was not something to brag about. However, it seemed that the big problem was my non-confrontational attitude when it came to solving problems. I usually took a quiet solution to most difficulties, which annoyed her. She seemed to think that a real man should face his problems and win by intimidation. It's a concept I couldn't swallow. I think that's what led to my current dilemma. Please understand I am not a weakling or a cuckold. I may not seem very manly, but I'm not going to be shat on. However, I will refrain from direct confrontation with the enemy. My methods sometimes seem inappropriate for a real man, but I'm more interested in the results than the appearance. What people think of me doesn't matter as long as I get the upper hand. A real man wouldn't stoop to many of the things I do under any circumstances. There are more important things than pride. My wife finds this unacceptable. Today I'm sitting in my car, around the corner from my house. The kids went to school, and I went to work, 20 minutes ago. My job is flexible, so taking time off at odd hours is not a problem while I'm doing my job. What I'm waiting for doesn't happen every day, and I'm looking forward to it here. I didn't drink coffee at breakfast, so I wouldn't have to worry about taking a leak. 20 minutes later, a black and white police car drove slowly down the street and stopped at my door. Frank Perella, one of the best in town, got out of the car and waved to his partner as he drove away. A minute later, Frank came through my front door. You can see the complexity of my situation. How can a man with my character flaws put up with his wife having an affair with a police officer? Who should I tell about this, and how can I confirm it? I'm sure most people won't approve of what I'm planning, but I'm not like most people, and I don't live to satisfy most people. Anyone who wears blinkers that show the qualities of real men will condemn me. I don't care because I want results. When I was in elementary school, I suffered from the same weak character traits that I have now. I don't think I developed them, but I think I was born with them. I'm sure there's a scientific name for them, but I've never bothered to look it up. Of course, I've never had any therapy or anything like that. In 5th grade, I made a good friend named Charlie Higgins. Charlie was the exact opposite of me. He was big, ugly, and always in plain sight. He wasn't really smart, and I quickly discovered that he couldn't read. We spent a lot of time together that year, and by the time we got to 6th grade, Charlie was reading as well as anyone in the class. He always remembered the special classes and the fact that I did it unnoticed by others. Charlie stayed by my side until we started 10th grade. It was nice because no one ever bothered me when he was around. Unfortunately, Charlie also liked girls, and before the end of the year, one of them got knocked up by him. He dropped out of school, married a girl, and got a job as a bricklayer's assistant. Soon, Charlie became the father of a little girl. I followed Charlie, but we didn't have a close relationship. I kept a low profile after Charlie left, but by the will of fate, I became a target for a bully athlete, Troy Manning, in my senior year. I did everything I could to avoid him, except escape. I have never been able to surpass him in anything, be it physical or verbal. Troy enjoyed subjecting me to public humiliation in the hallways and on school grounds. The fact that he was one of the coolest athletes in school meant that he got some good football scholarship offers. Like all athletes, his pride and joy was the university jacket that he wore every day, whether it was hot or cold. The ink comes in a cute little square bottle with a short spout. Of course, they are indelible. I had no problem getting a hall pass, and it was a piece of cake to pour the entire bottle of ink through the air vents of Troy's locker. In an undertaking like this, you don't have much control, but I've had enough success to make the jacket unusable for the rest of the year. Of course, school jackets can't just be replaced by going to the corner store. Poor Troy had to do without her. No one has found out who doused him. Unfortunately, the bullying didn't stop, and then Troy started wearing his university sweater as I expected. It wasn't as impressive as the jacket, but he still used it to strut around. The first part of the preparation has been completed. The next day I went to school with a new bottle of ink and a sock with 3 golf balls inside. I don't like pain, and I'm not a masochist, but extreme measures were needed to correct my injustice. Since Troy's locker was next to the boys' bathroom, I planned to linger at the door when he discovered that his favorite sweater was also covered in ink. He was furious, and all the kids in the hallway couldn't help but notice his tantrum. I was standing at the bathroom door with a smug grin on my face, hoping that he would look in my direction. And of course he did. He needed someone to vent his rage on, and I teased him. He burst in, pushed me into the toilet, and pinned me against the wall. All the boys who were in the bathroom ran out into the hallway along with the rest of the crowd. He made more noise and bluster than anything else, and I was a little disappointed with his sluggish attack because it meant more work for me. He didn't leave any marks on me. Hitting yourself on the head and face with a sock full of golf balls is cruel to say the least. It would have been easier to ask someone to do it for me, but I was determined. It only took a few minutes, and I was swollen enough to realize that I would have 2 black eyes and a badly bleeding nose. Unfortunately, due to some miscalculations, I also knocked out one of my fangs, so it was almost coming out. It would take a few minutes for my eyes to start getting dark, and that was fine. Golf balls flew out of the toilet window into the bushes below, and a torn sock went into the trash. I stretched out on the floor in one of the booths. A few minutes later, a student came in and found me. The school nurse decided that it was better to send me to the emergency department of the hospital. Troy Manning was not only suspended from classes, but also stripped of all scholarships. My tooth healed fine, and my face was completely healed by the time we had to take pictures for graduation. No one bothered me for the rest of the year. Troy, of course, denied everything. Frank Perella was my new Troy Manning. 2 hours later, a black and white car pulled up in front of the house. Frank walked out the front door, and I watched as my loving wife kissed him goodbye. She was wearing a bathrobe. I waited about 5 minutes and went into the house. As I expected, there was water running in the shower. The bed was still in disarray, and her clothes were on the floor. There was a trash can next to the bedside table, in which a light blue plastic bag was stuffed. Inside the plastic bag were 2 used condoms, neatly tied. At least she was practicing safe lovemaking. That was all I needed to see. I quietly left the house and went to work. When I got home from work in the evening, I ducked into the garage and took out a blue bag from the trash can. I put 2 condoms in a zippered bag and put it on my desk, where I was sure Angela wouldn't find it. All the swimmers were dead by this time, but the DNA lives on. By the end of the second week, I had 10 filled condoms. It's time for the next step of my plan. Frank never came to my house on Fridays. I found out that day he was visiting his mother at a nursing home in the city center. His partner dropped him off at 10 a.m. and picked him up around 11 a.m. I had several clients in the building, and it was not difficult to arrange a meeting with one of them. All elderly people are looking forward to the company, even if it is an insurance agent. The nursing home had a surveillance camera at the entrance to the underground garage, but it was the only one. Very few of the residents were driving, so most of the cars using the garage were in some way visitors. One afternoon, I had a long lunch and went to the interstate. There were several adult video stores near the entrance ramps. The first 2 places only had videos, but the third also had toys. For $20, I bought a set of giant anal beads. I asked the seller if he had any recommendations, and he said to use more lubricants. It seemed tempting to me. A marinade syringe and a 30-centimeter aquarium tube completed my shopping list. I was ready to work. Angela was getting more sullen every day. Her contempt for me grew steadily. Wednesday morning was important to my plan. I usually avoided her taunts and banter, but today I answered. When I was finishing breakfast, she made a snide remark about the fact that I no longer made love to her. She went over my manhood several times. That was what I was looking for. I'm sorry, dear. Even if your lover uses condoms, I still don't want to risk catching the disease. I hope you understand. She stood there with her usual smirk on her face, just looking at me. It's only in the last few months that she's started treating me like this. She didn't say anything, It was like she was provoking me to say more. I don't think you realize the seriousness of the situation you've put yourself in. The smile on her face suddenly disappeared. She began to fidget a little, and her eyes darted around the room. Now she didn't know what to do. When I started to walk out the door, I turned around and said, "He can't protect you forever." As I was leaving, I noticed a slight fear in his eyes. It worked perfectly. By the time I got to work, there was a police car on my back bumper. I was sitting in my car with the window open when Frank Perella came over. He leaned against the door of my car and gave me the meanest face he could. "Who the hell do you think you are, asshole? My relationship with your wife is none of your business, and I would advise you to keep your nose out of it and keep your mouth shut. If you make any more smart remarks about Angela, I'll make sure you get a good time in Grateford. I'm sure some of the guys there would be happy to have you as a cellmate. Am I making myself clear?" "Yes, sir." "Great." He gave me one of his confident grins and walked back to the patrol car. I was sure that Angela would call him after I left the house, and I hoped that he would stop me. I turned off the recorder and got to work. It promised to be a good day. Dinner that evening was very quiet. The girls and I chatted for a while, but Angela hardly said a word. The self-confident, arrogant smile that was on her face disappeared. Every time I caught her looking at me, she quickly looked away. She avoided eye contact at all costs. Until today, she looked at me with slight contempt. I didn't even begin to implement my plan, but she began to be afraid. Although she might not like me anymore, she seemed to know me. The uncertain future made her feel very uncomfortable. I don't believe Frank could have said anything that would have made it disappear. On Thursday, I spent the whole day preparing for an important day. I found the nearest emergency room at the hospital and dialed my lawyer's number on speed dial. A bit of coarse sandpaper gave the anal beads a deadly surface. I collected the liquid from each condom and put it in a small medicine bottle. I attached the tube to the marinade injector so it wouldn't fall off. Everything was carefully planned, and I repeated it 100 times to make sure everything was perfect. That night, Angela slept with the girls. I didn't ask why. The most difficult part of my plan was the insertion of anal beads. I roughed them up pretty hard, and then pushed them as deep into the rectum as I could. It hurt like hell to type, and I wasn't going to look forward to being deleted. I entered them just before leaving the house. In 4 hours, my ass should hurt a lot. It was about 10 o'clock on button when a patrol car dropped Frank off near the elevator at the nursing home. A few minutes later, I took the same elevator to see Martha Forbush. Martha was 70, and she loved the company. I spent about 20 minutes with her and then quietly left. She knows I was there, but her idea of time was a little confusing. It was a painful visit because I had to sit with these damn balloons inside. When I got to my car safely, I tore my coat slightly, as well as a couple of belt loops and a seam on my trousers. I was watching the time carefully. Frank seemed to be a punctual guy. I filled the marinade syringe with liquid from the medicine bottle. There was still some left, so I reached back and smeared my boxers and shirt. Frank got out of the elevator just in time, and a moment later the black and white picked him up. Now there is pain. I grabbed the string from the anal beads and yanked it as if it were a Band-Aid. It was very uncomfortable, but I felt relieved when I pulled them out. The marinade injector was a good choice. I put the tube in my ass and poured the whole load inside. I came out of the garage from the back and dumped all my supplies into the storm drain. Why would anyone want to watch? Looking as shocked and unkempt as I could, I stumbled into St. Joseph's emergency room and announced to the world that I had been raped. The police and the Rape Crisis Center were immediately called. They took me to the examination room where they stripped me and put my clothes in a bag. An internal examination revealed an injury to the rectum and a large amount of fluid. I was worried that I might have overdone the liquid, but I was afraid that I might lose some going to the hospital. They found liquid on my clothes. The doctor confirmed that I had indeed been raped and left me with a laboratory assistant. Around this time, the police and a representative from the anti-rape unit arrived. They asked the lab assistant to leave for a while, and then spent 30 minutes trying to get information from me. When I said that I thought my rapist might be a policeman, the room went quiet. Since the DNA of all government employees is registered for exclusion purposes, the woman investigating the rapes assured me that they would have a positive result within 24 hours. She was sure that by that time all the police officers would be acquitted. The hospital notified Angela of the incident and asked her to bring some clothes to the hospital for me. She delivered the clothes but didn't bother to look in on me or inquire about my condition. After the police left, the lab technician returned. She was a young girl in her early 20s. She had straight blonde hair and very fair skin with freckles. My name is Ted. Sorry, we were not introduced. They call me Jilly. My real name is Jillian. She looked at me strangely with a slight smile. I watched as she filled out the forms and laid out the samples for what they would do with them. Jilly, who's going to get a copy of the DNA report? The police. Is that all? The laboratory will provide certified copies to anyone who wants or needs them. Why are you asking? Could you sign me and my lawyer up for a copy, please? Of course, no problem. Anything else? What are you doing with the remaining samples? You know that there is an excess of them. We usually just throw them away. Why did you ask? Can you tag them or certify the remaining samples and then save them? Of course. We have a secure storage facility and we can guarantee that the samples will not be compromised. I think I'm in love with you, Jilly. Can you do all this for me? By this time, I was dressed and sitting on the edge of the bed. Jilly sat down next to me and smiled. I can take care of everything for you and maybe even more if you promise to buy me dinner. I'm married. I know, but I bet you won't be married long. What's all this about? I'm not Brad Pitt. Why are you interested in having dinner with me? I think you are a very smart person and I want to get to know you better. I think I know what you did today, but I don't know exactly how you did it. I'll keep quiet if you treat me to dinner tonight. This was not part of my plans. I didn't allow it, but I liked this girl. I'll meet you at the Outback at 7. It's a date. Can I call you a taxi so you can go home? Your wife left half an hour ago. My car is in the garage across the street. I think I can get to this place. I'll see you at 7. Apart from the unexpected conversation with Jilly, everything went as planned. The next few days are going to be exciting. Angela was sitting in the living room when I got home. Thanks for taking my clothes to the hospital. I would appreciate a ride. I'm sorry. I wasn't sure how long you'd be gone, and I wanted to be here when the girls got home from school. I went upstairs to take a shower. Oh, by the way, I'm fine. There's nothing to worry about. Thanks for asking. Later, when I went downstairs, Angela was still sitting in the same position. She looked at me but didn't say anything. The arrogant grin was gone. It was only 4 o'clock in the afternoon. There were 3 hours left before dinner. I decided to take a ride. When I backed out of the driveway, the girls were just coming home from school. Damn, my ass hurt. Dinner gave me absolute pleasure. Although everything was quiet and measured, I had a great time. Jilly and I were like a cat with a mouse. I didn't admit to anything, and she didn't tell me about her suspicions. She was raised by her mother, and she never had a man or a father in her life. I got the feeling that she didn't trust men at all, and didn't communicate with them. It took us an hour to eat the salad before we ordered the food. We spent the whole evening repeating the same thing. She told me how smart I was, and I told her how perceptive she was. We stayed there for more than 2 hours, constantly talking and, in fact, saying nothing. It was wonderful, but only a perverted mind can imagine the joy of it. We promised to meet again on Monday evening. When I got home, I found Angela sleeping with the girls again. I provided for her and gave her everything. She threw it away, and now she didn't seem to know what to do. Frank was married and had his own family. He would have dumped her in a second, and she knew it. She also knew that I would never take her back. Angela was in the middle of things, and it made her unhappy. I used to love her, but now there was no love or pity. I sincerely believed that she was afraid of me. Maybe Frank would have protected her. I left home early on Sunday morning and was out all day. I found all sorts of ways to kill time without spending a lot of money. When I got home around 6, I found the house empty. Angela left me a note. She picked up the girls and went to visit her parents in Tennessee. There was no mention of when she might return. Most of their clothes were gone. It looks like she planned to stay for a long time. I think I felt relieved. I stopped by Seymour Schlamp's office first thing in the morning. Seymour was a bit secretive, but as a lawyer, I liked him. He has already received the results of the DNA analysis from the laboratory by night mail. I think it was Jilly's idea. There was no doubt about it. My rapist was Frank Perella. I explained to Seymour why I had sent him a copy of the test results. He said it was a great idea under the circumstances. I gave him a copy of the recording of Officer Perel threatening me. I told him about the affair Perel had with my wife and gave him the time and dates. At 10 o'clock, Seymour and I were at the district attorney's office. 2 imposing men entered the room with folders and tablets. After introducing themselves to each other, they began to explain that they would not be able to continue the investigation because there was no DNA evidence. Seymour started laughing, and it was hard for me to keep a straight face. Gentlemen, under the circumstances, we assumed that the results of the DNA analysis would be inaccurate, so we sent several duplicates. I know it's a bit unusual, but it seems like it was worth the effort, right? I think it's important to make sure that justice is served, isn't it? Seymour pushed 2 copies of the DNA results across the table to the men who were supposed to represent me. The original was filed at the courthouse at 9 a.m. These are just working copies. I was afraid that the original might get lost again. Seymour was good. That's why I hired him. The district attorney and his assistant sighed at the same time and seemed to slump in their chairs. You knew it was Frank Perella before we entered this room, didn't you? None of them answered the question. After a few seconds, the district attorney began to speak. Why would Frank Perella, an outstanding and decorated officer, do this? I'm sorry, but this is unthinkable. Seymour smiled from ear to ear. Officer Perel had an affair with Mr. Briscoe's wife, Angela. This went on for several months. His partner can confirm this. When Mr. Briscoe came face to face with his wife and asked her to stop, she immediately told Frank Perella. Officer Perel and his partner then stopped Mr. Briscoe in their patrol car, and Officer Perel threatened to send Mr. Briscoe to jail if he didn't drop the subject. The district attorney leaned back in his chair and smiled. This is the biggest nonsense I've ever heard. There's no way you're going to convince me or the jury that this ever happened. Finally, I had had enough. I raised my hand to Seymour, indicating that I wanted to talk. I leaned over the table and looked the district attorney straight in the eye. You're supposed to be on my side. This is the second time in 10 minutes that you've concluded that I'm a liar. If you do this again, I will file a grandiose lawsuit against you and the whole city, with a huge number of publications in the media. Sit here, shut up, and listen. When the recording is over, I expect an apology from both of you. I pressed the play button on my recorder. Seymour leaned back in his chair and smiled. Who the hell do you think you are, asshole? My relationship with your wife is none of your business, and I would advise you to keep your nose out of it and keep your mouth shut. If you make any more smart remarks about Angela, I'll make sure you get a good time in Grateford. I'm sure some of the guys there would be happy to have you as a cellmate. Am I making myself clear? I leaned back in my chair and let Seymour take the initiative. Do you recognize the voice of Frank Perel, or do we need an expert to confirm this for you? Maybe the Internal Affairs Department will be interested in this case? I immediately received apologies from both gentlemen. Seymour and I excused ourselves and got up to leave. Call me when you get your thoughts together and we'll talk again. Seymour was good. Besides, I'd like to get a restraining order by the end of the day to keep all uniformed officers away from Mr. Briscoe. The situation seems ripe for retaliation. 2 men in suits just sat and watched us leave. Jilly and I had a great time at the Olive Garden that night. She wanted me to go to her place for a drink at night, but I chickened out. Maybe next time, I told her. Somehow, the whole story got leaked to the local newspaper. They didn't hide any of the names of the people involved, including Angela. It didn't really matter since she wasn't there, and I doubted she'd ever come back. However, it mattered to Frank Perel's wife and her 2 brothers-in-law. Frank was beaten to a pulp, and he didn't say who did it. I've always wondered if he was beaten for cheating or for making love to a man. In any case, the results were the same. Frank's business was not going well. In the end, he was forced to admit his guilt. He received 5 years, but avoided the publicity of the trial. He was supposed to serve his sentence at GW in Grateford West. That's where they sent white-collar criminals and dirty cops. Among ordinary people, Frank would have big problems. Which brings me to my old friend Charlie. Some time ago, some idiot accosted Charlie's wife, and he ended up in the hospital. Charlie finished his term at GW because they had a bricklaying school. He spent 2 years in a maximum security colony, teaching a group of convicts how to lay bricks. I visited Charlie's wife, Josie. Their daughter, Sarah, graduated from high school and was accepted into the dental hygiene school in Boyertown. The only problem was that she had to pay $6,000 for her tuition. Since Charlie was in prison, the family had to depend on Josie's income. I knew all this in advance, so I came prepared. I gave Josie a check for tuition and a sealed envelope. I asked her to give the envelope to Charlie the next time she comes on a date. Seymour prepared and mailed the divorce papers to Angela at her parents' home in Bristol. I gave her custody of the children and monthly child support, but not alimony. Her infidelity was well documented, and Seymour took care of it. Jilly and I discussed the possibility that I would try to get custody, but we both agreed that I was too unstable to be an effective father, I really got along well with both of my daughters and sometimes felt that I was closer to them than their mother. Jilly and I were soulmates. Wow, that's deep. She's the only girl I've ever felt comfortable with. I didn't tell her all my secrets and she didn't share her secrets with me, but somehow we got closer. Since Angela was no longer there and soon she would disappear from my life forever, I had no qualms about sleeping with Jilly. She moved into my house. The house was rented out, so it wouldn't be a problem during the divorce. She wasn't a very good cook, but she was good at almost everything else. We often ate outside the house. There was a mysterious aura about Jilly. I found out about it later. Angela signed and returned the papers almost immediately. She didn't ask for anything and didn't even hire a lawyer. I'll be free in 3 months. I didn't have to stay here until the end. Jilly and I spent a lot of time discussing the possibilities of moving. We wanted it to be a little warmer, but not too hot. We decided it would be nice to do without snow, but we still wanted 4 seasons. Getting a transfer from my company would not be a problem. Jilly could find a job almost anywhere. Huntsville, Alabama seemed like the perfect place for us. It was near Nashville and Chattanooga, and taxes were high. A good house could be bought for half the price of most other places. We both warned about this and started packing. Before I left, I found out that Frank Perella had been severely beaten in the pantry and the kitchen in Grateford West. The guard suggested that it was some kind of revenge of the prisoners he had been in contact with earlier. He was kicked so hard in the groin that his bladder and testicles were permanently damaged. I received a nice letter from Charlie thanking me for the help I had given Sarah. He also thanked me for Josie. I didn't say anything to Charlie, but Seymour was working to get his sentence reduced. Up to this point, everything was going as planned. We didn't expect a phone call from Angela's parents. "Ted, this is Mary, Angela's mother. I'm sorry to bother you, but we need help." "What kind of help? What's the matter?" "Angela doesn't take care of the girls. She doesn't go anywhere near them. She claims they're demons and they're mad at her because of what she did to you." "That doesn't sound normal." "She refused to tell us exactly what she did to you, which is why they're upset. In fact, she practically refuses to talk about anything. We really need your help." "Other than that, is she okay?" "No. She stays in her room all day with the door locked. I have to bring her food. She seems to be afraid of her own daughters." "What do you want me to do?" "You have to come and get the girls. We can take care of Angela, but not the girls either." "Good. We'll be passing through Bristol on Saturday. We'll stop and pick them up. Let everything be ready." "Thanks, Ted. We appreciate it." I explained to Jilly that I wasn't cut out to be a parent. With my quirky personality traits, girls would grow up to be as quirky as me. Outwardly, I seem normal, but inside I am far from it. It wasn't fair to expose 2 innocent girls to such an environment. After a few hours, she decided that we should try. Jilly will be a stay-at-home mom. For some reason, I got the feeling that she was expecting this. We rented a small house west of Huntsville for 1 year. The internet is a great invention. Our furniture and other things were supposed to be delivered soon after we got there. Bristol was just on the way. Jilly was nervous about meeting the girls. I was nervous about the upcoming meeting with Angela. However, things did not turn out as expected. I couldn't tell Jilly that my daughters were a little unusual. They weren't ordinary little girls, just like their father wasn't a normal man. It was something I tried to ignore, but I was always aware of. Angela's parents greeted us with a sigh of relief. We entered the house, and when Angela saw me, she immediately ran to her room and locked the door. I guess I wasn't worried about anything. I decided to leave it as it is. Jilly was standing in the living room when my 2 daughters came over. They stared at each other for a few seconds, and then a wide smile appeared on all 3 faces. I felt like they were having a private joke and I stayed away. However, I was very pleased with the first meeting. The girls came up to Jilly, and each of them hugged her legs, which they never did with their mother. Jilly put her hands on each of their heads and smiled. "Jilly, I'd like you to meet my daughters, Lilith and Sybil." I had a strange feeling that there was no need for an introduction. I think the next few years of my life will be very interesting.